Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa has secured a second term in a result which gave him 53% of the vote. The opposition has rejected the result, and observer missions have declared the Zimbabwe elections neither free nor fair. So what does this mean for the country, but also for the region? To answer those questions, we are now joined by Chief Executive Officer of Elections Management and Consulting Agency of Africa, Ms. Lulu White. Lulu, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. I think let's start off with your organization, the Elections Management and Consulting Agency of Africa. Just, how involved you were, if at all, at really looking into the elections that were just held in Zimbabwe. And then, of course, your assessment of whether or not they were free and fair.
Well, MCA was not involved in this particular election. As you know, this is a constitutional election of the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission. And obviously, when we make observations, we're making observations from outside looking in, given the fact that MCA is an elections company, but also that we participate with many other observer groups that would generally send observers to places such as Zimbabwe, or to places where there are elections taking place. However, in this election, MCA was not able to send anybody to attend on its behalf. We observed the election from here.
And from here, what is your assessment then of whether or not these elections, in your view, were free and fair?
Look, the SADC mission head said it all. If you looked at part of his statement and what he had said when he was making the pronouncement, that there were issues of intimidation, where there was an organization that stationed itself outside voting stations, requiring members of the public to come and report to them before they went in. And then when people came out, they were asked to submit whether it was a serial number of the ballot paper, so that they can verify whether indeed they voted correctly. That in itself compromised the principles of democracy in terms of people being able to vote for their choice. There's also the issue that was raised, which is very significant, which talks to the delimitation of boundaries just prior an election, the whole process of delimitation. The observer mission, that was the SADC observer mission, actually observed that was not done in accordance to the Constitution or to the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission Act. So that was also a red flag. Another factor that also needed to be taken into account is the media. I mean, the fact that Zimbabwe only has one media station, and only ZANU-PF was allowed to sort of advertise or to campaign on national TV. That is also something that really needs to look at. And intimidation, the reports of intimidation that actually came across quite strongly. I think if people were observing the elections, even towards the elections, the road to the actual elections, even during what you call these things, campaign trails, or when people had to go to stadiums, ZANU-PF seems to have larger numbers, and each time the opposition parties got to a point where they actually had numbers, then there was intimidation as well. So when you look at all of those factors, you then realize that the environment itself, even though it was not as adversely violent as it was in 2018, the environment was actually not conducive enough, particularly for the opposition members to be able to say that the election was free and fair or credible.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about what the region now does, right? Because it also is important that you've got regional heads of state and even SADC itself acknowledge this election. What is the message that we should be hearing from the individual heads of state within the SADC region, in your view? Do they support this election? Do they go ahead, or do they speak out and say, well, we're concerned about just the validity of this election?
Look, it would be very interesting to actually finally have a loud voice that comes from regional leaders where this election is actually concerned. I think on Sunday night, I seem to have forgotten the leader that actually came out and offered asylum to Emmerson Mnangagwa, because the impression that we all got when we were observing was that he had actually, this election was a washout. It appeared as though Nelson Chamisa had won this election. Therefore, there were leaders that were actually offered. There was a leader, particularly, I forgot which country, that actually offered him to basically come into the country so that he's then able to renegotiate his terms in terms of what must happen post post him handing over power. There's been a call, but not necessarily from the region, but there's been a call across, social media platforms to say, let there be no bloodshed this time in Zimbabwe, let the change come because people are looking for change. So there has been, a call. Like I said, there's one African leader that I forgot the name from. Now, where the rest of the other leaders, they've been very quiet. And it would have been really interesting to hear what they would say, particularly because this is the first time the SADC Observer Mission actually comes out to say these elections were actually not credible. It would have been really interesting to hear what they would have actually, having the region speak out loudly to see whether that would drive the Electoral Commission in Zimbabwe to schedule new elections. It would have been interesting, but it doesn't seem like we're going to be hearing anything anytime soon.
Yeah, so Nelson Chamisa, of course, leader of the opposition party, really wanting to dig at his heels in here, saying that, he has, of course, at this point not provided evidence of rigged elections, but he says that he will be taking this matter up. He has a week for him to do so. I mean, the likelihood that you think he's going to be able to find such evidence, and even if he does Zimbabwe have the judiciary infrastructure and the institutional infrastructure in place for it to support the evidence that would be provided by Nelson Chamisa, or at the very least look into some of those allegations?
Look, they have a responsibility. I mean, the courts actually do have a responsibility to actually investigate and verify the claims that are being made by Nelson Chamisa. And one can only hope. I mean, but obviously, given the history, this has happened before with the MDC in Zimbabwe, where the case was thrown out because of lack of evidence. It would have gone to his advantage, actually, if they had actually recorded those V11 forms. Because what happens with every end of the election would be that there's a results sheet that people are supposed to sign to declare, or observers confirming that indeed this is the result, this is the election result that was counted at the polls, and we are happy, and people have that type of evidence. That would then go in their favor, the matter go in their favor. But if they do not have that, what other way can they prove this election was actually not won fairly?